How did your business get started, Joshua?
So I've been in consulting and business for several years now, and decided recently that I wanted to bring all of the work that I do in the space under one umbrella. So my current firm, which is called Vault Profit Partners, is doing that. It's a way to bring all of the various experiences, skills, and most importantly, collaborators, into one place so that I can best serve my clients, which at this point tend to be CEOs and CFOs. And that could be some of the larger companies in the world, or it could be a startup that's just getting going. I like to do a lot of advising on that front as well. But the primary audience I'm serving right now are CEOs and CFOs of companies that, say, have at least 250 employees, several $1 million in revenues, running up to a few $1 billion in revenues. That's the sweet spot these days.
And I understand you worked at McKinsey, so you're kind of used to dealing with companies like this.
Absolutely. So I spent time at McKinsey. I've spent time in operational roles as well. I was the CFO for a company doing $270 million in revenue. And where I enjoy playing the most is actually in that middle market. So the vast majority of companies, hospitals, health systems, that I work with nowadays tend to be in that range, let's say of north of $100 million in revenue up to a few $1 billion in revenue. Of course, with McKinsey, you're serving companies into the multiple billions of revenue too. And I find I like to work more closely with the CEOs and CFOs. So that tends to happen more in that middle market space.
And what would you say that your business is uniquely known for?
Today we're built on two key pillars, and that is full contingency and collaboration. So to expand on those a little bit, full contingency, meaning for our clients that we serve today, there is no out-of-pocket investment required. And once they get back an uptick in revenue and profit, then we would earn with them on the back end of that. So we're fully aligned with the clients that we serve today. And given how the economy is nowadays, you can imagine people are quite reluctant to invest into new processes, services, service providers, and things like that. So that's the primary unique driver that we have. And to do that, it's really all about collaboration. So we've got a suite of best-in-class service providers that I work with. I'm not doing all this work myself. What I've learned over the years is that I can be much more effective in serving my clients, the CEOs and CFOs, by making available to them the best possible people I have. One thing I've noticed after years of consulting, especially as people are working, kind of leaving firms and maybe building their own firm, sometimes we tend to be a bit territorial. And sometimes we find a client and people tend to latch on to that client and think, I can do everything for you. And in reality, there are probably other people that could come in and complement what you do and do that as their best-in-class, offering for them. So that other pillar we have of collaboration I've found to be vital, not only for better serving the clients that we have, but also as a business development tactic, which we'll certainly dive into a little bit later on. There's more than enough work for everyone out there. And when we enter into a client relationship and start thinking about who are the other people that I can bring in here, I find that we expand the pie for all of us. So those twin pillars of full contingency really reduces the risk for the clients, and collaboration allows us to expand out and operate more as maybe a large consulting firm may do by making sure we bring in the right relationships at the right time.
I noticed in the video on the homepage of your website that you recommend solutions that generate sizable revenue for hospitals, health systems, and group practices, including healthcare underpayments, on-demand pay, accounts payable, automation, and IRS incentives. And I'm wondering, in which of these four areas do you think a hospital is potentially losing the most revenue?
So they're certainly losing the most in underpayments. And I'll explain briefly what underpayments are, because it's not a term that most people are familiar with unless they've worked specifically in that space. But if you think of a hospital, a health system, or a group practice, right? They have contractual relationships with insurance companies to pay them for the services they provide. And the provider, the hospitals, they actually have to do the services first before they get paid by the insurance companies. And what ends up happening is after providing the service, the hospital submits some information to the insurance provider so that they can get reimbursed according to that contract. Unfortunately, it's very rare that they get paid the full contractual amount. And so the difference between what they're contractually, stated that they should be paid and what actually comes into the hospital is often quite large. So in terms of the money they're losing, the medical underpayments portion of a hospital's operation is an area where you lose a tremendous amount of revenue and profit. And then to go ahead and try to address that problem, you add on to your costs because people are now staffed up with very large teams of people that fall under an umbrella that we call revenue cycle management. And so you might imagine you have a team of people whose job it is to manage those contracts and to ensure they can get the payment from the insurance companies. They've also invested usually into software to do the same, to identify where these underpayments may live. And oftentimes they'll bring in outside consultants as well. So it's a tremendous problem inside of the hospital system, and it actually affects all of us. Anyone that's listening to us talk right now is being affected by this because hospitals are under tremendous economic pressure. It's really a tough time in healthcare in the United States right now. So what happens at the end of the day to all of us is we end up with a decrease in the quality of the patient care because the dollars simply aren't there to invest in the places that they need to be. So that's the biggest challenge of the services that I work with, for hospitals, for health systems, and for group providers.
So they're losing money and then they're spending more money chasing the money, essentially.
Exactly. And what happens, as you might imagine, the insurance companies are quite sophisticated, both in contract negotiations, and they have teams of people whose job it is to ensure that the insurance company maximizes its profits. So you end up with a game, unfortunately, that feels sometimes like warring armies, trying to solve these battles here. And what happens, and this happens not only in healthcare, but whenever you have a department, in finance that you're trying to collect on the money that you're owed, you have this concept of call it aging receivables, right? You do the best you can to get paid on time according to contract terms. And at some point in time, you throw your hands up and you have to move on because your team simply can't keep chasing that money for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, whatever that threshold may be. And in the hospital environment, you end up with a very unique situation. So on one hand, you have these aging receivables, which the team has identified and has been trying to collect on. But what you don't see is there are a lot of underpayments that are not easy to identify. So you end up with this two buckets, the AR that's aging and what I call the hidden AR, which you don't even know that you're missing. And the companies that I work with in this space actually put more of their emphasis on that hidden AR. They have very sophisticated software that essentially scans all of the contracts between the hospitals and the insurance companies. They scan all of the reimbursement requests that the hospitals submit. And in the comparison of those two things, they find a tremendous amount of money to go after. Just to give you an order of magnitude here, if a hospital has collected from insurers $100 million in reimbursement, they already have that money in the door. On average, there's another $22 million in this hidden AR that they're not getting.
So it sounds like I was going to ask you, like, how did they get in this situation? But it sounds like they just need to prepare themselves to deal with insurance companies better. They're just not equipped to collect all the money. And I guess also it's just a tracking issue. Like they don't have visibility on all their contracts or what. Is there anything that they're obviously any obvious mistakes that they're making? Anything they could do themselves to get out of this situation?
So, yes, I said, yes, there are obvious mistakes that do happen. And those obvious mistakes tend to be by incorrectly coding the services that they've been providing to patient or patients, so that when they submit that for reimbursement, sometimes the insurance company will outright deny. They will pay zero on that submission because the hospital, unfortunately, has made an error in that. The challenge that they have, though, is even when they are submitting according to contract, the insurers very frequently change the terms. And those changes can actually be called out in the contract itself. So it's not to say that the insurers are doing something illicit here. It just might be that the contractual terms change so frequently that it's almost impossible for the revenue cycle management team to keep up. So that's a big piece of the challenge, is that the environment is changing so quickly. And those could be things in the contractual terms that they have. It can also be changes in government regulations, right? Because a lot of this activity happens inside of the Medicare and the Medicaid systems as well. So the hospitals themselves certainly can get better, and they typically do that, again, trying to hire more people or find a technology solution that can help out. But the insurers are really in a place of power as it comes to that. They really drive the equation, and they're very sophisticated in that. And then the last element I'll share quickly is that there also are some underhanded tactics. So, for example, with the partners that I've worked with nowadays, in the last 4 weeks, they've identified a unique way that insurers are essentially clawing back reimbursement money. It's very underhanded. I don't think any other software system will pick it up. And this will run until it comes to light. And this isn't the first time that this happens. It's a constant game, almost like whack-a-mole, right? Where you've solved one problem and then something up will pop up. So it's a very complex issue.
Insurers are kind of sneaking things into the contract.
So sneaking things into the contract and sometimes doing things that aren't in the contract. You see both behaviors, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, what about the other 3 areas that you help clients with? Can you share some information about those?
Absolutely. And you asked about healthcare specifically, but outside of underpayments, all the other work I do is relevant across the board into a variety of verticals and industries. And the other things I'll mention now are also relevant inside of the world of healthcare as well. Again, all of these things are serving typically the CFO or CEO and in their general problems that people have to deal with. So the first one, which we call AP automation, is actually really interesting. And unfortunately, I lived some very difficult times when I was acting as the CFO for these large companies because I didn't have such automation. And that is the issue of fraud, right? So if you think about nowadays, companies typically pay their vendors via one of 3 ways. They either pay them via a paper check, an ACH transfer, or a direct deposit, right? And inside of those systems, the AP department has to, of course, hire staff. They have to make sure they enter the invoices properly, match the invoices up with the payments, right? There's a tremendous series of processes that need to be done. And add to that nowadays some very sophisticated criminal operations that will use things like email phishing attacks and other ways to essentially trick people in the department to releasing funds when they shouldn't. That's become a really big challenge to companies across the world. And in order to start to address these kinds of things, this AP solution that I currently work on is quite interesting. And so what happens is, if you're choosing how to pay your vendors and you have those specific terms set up, right, there's another alternative outside of check, ACH, or direct deposit, and that's called a virtual credit card. So we all have a physical credit card that sits in our wallet, right? It's got those 16 digits and you can present that to a merchant. You also know that you can do what's called a card not present transaction if you buy something over the internet. Well, virtual cards give the finance department and the AT department a great tool to start to pay their vendors for a few things. Number one, The virtual card is typically used just for one invoice and one transaction. So you know the exact amount that's being paid, to whom it's being paid, and what you're paying for. So it has a tremendous opportunity to reduce fraud in that regard, and also to provide enhanced data so people know exactly what's being paid and when. Right? If you sat in this role at all, you know that sometimes you'll get a payment for multiple things at the same time, and it can be impossible to tease out exactly what's rolled into that payment that came from a company. So that's number one. Number two is probably the more important piece. And the AP department is typically thought of as a cost center. Right? You pay your staff, it costs money to run checks, all of the systems you use. Well, if you start to use virtual credit cards to pay, you have that credit card interchange fee, right? A few percentage points that the credit card companies charge for processing that payment. And the nice thing is that fee can now come back to you into your AP department. So by paying your vendors, which you're going to do every month anyway, you can now start to generate sizable revenue and profit into that AP department. So it completely changes the way that you can think about your AP department, because it can bring in now additional revenue. It can free up your employees that work in AP, and now they can focus on higher value added items. Now, what's interesting is if you were to go to Europe today, you would find almost complete usage of this virtual credit card type behavior inside of the European companies. The United States is very far behind as it relates to this. And over the next 5 years, if a company doesn't switch to this kind of automation, they're going to be looked at as a dinosaur. People will demand it. And what's interesting is we start to see a very quick uptick now in the vendors that will accept virtual card. Right. So when we go into a new client, right, the first question the client has, rightly so, is, will my vendors accept this virtual card payment, or will they mandate that I continue with the check, with the ACH, the direct deposit? And what we find now is we'll typically see a 25 to 50% uptake of the virtual card. And now the provider, in this case that I've been working with, has been doing this so long that they actually have a database that contains almost any vendor that a company might be using. So they can quickly run an audit and upfront tell this company, hey, if you implement this solution that we're talking about, we already have identified exactly which vendors will accept the virtual card. So they're able to upfront to tell them how much money each month they'll be able to earn in rebate, which makes it a nice and kind of a simple way for the CFO and the CEO to make the decisions around these.
So is it more secure? Is it?
It's more secure, yeah, because you have that full trackability and you have a invoice by invoice payment structure that can be automated, and certain permissions can be given so that only the appropriate people, as they do today, are able to sign off, on the transfers and on the payments.
Okay, did we cover all three of them there? So the automated payments?
That would be the second one. The third one I'll mention is actually quite an interesting one nowadays. Unfortunately, 80% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. And when I share that figure, many people think, oh, that's just for those hourly workers that are at the local McDonald's or other rest. But no, it's not true. It's across the economy. And with the current economy as it is, unfortunately, that number is ticking up right now. So this other thing we work with is actually a very interesting benefit that companies can use to attract talent and retain talent. And what they do is they offer something that's called earned wage access. What that simply means is, as an employee is waiting for their next paycheck, they can now get access for 50%, sometimes up to 90% of money they've already earned, right? They've put in the time, they've worked the days, but they haven't yet received payroll. And what's interesting here is they can receive that money not as a loan or some harsh payday type situation. It's simply an advance of the money. So when payroll is run a few days later, it's simply deducted out of that payroll.
So they're getting paid. They can get paid day to day then.
You can get paid every day if you choose to. Yeah. It's really nice. And what's nice, again, no cost at all to the employer to offer this kind of service. And that is just one piece of this benefit. So the earned wage access they have available, they have a pay card, so you can have a physical debit card that you can use as you would use any debit card, any location. And then there's a full suite of financial services that are delivered via an app. So bill pay and ATM access and a whole suite of services. And there's no charge to the employee either. They can access this entire suite of services for free. If they need something today, like within minutes, they might have a small fee, $2.95 or something like that. But what this service is doing is a few things. One, it's giving people access to their money, right? It's your money, right? Get your hands on it if you need to quickly. And it's also addressing things related to these, call it unbanked or underbanked communities, because it provides a full suite of services like you might get from any of the top tier banks. And it allows anyone with a cell phone to have access to that kind of thing. So that was really interesting, because if companies are starting to put this into their job applications, we're seeing up to a 76% increase in the number of people applying, a tremendous increase. And then on the other side of the equation, retention, we're seeing drops of up to 35 or 40%. And based on the industry that you're working in, you know what the dollars may mean for recruiting new people, training new people, and walking them out the door as they disappear. Right now in QSR, you see more than 100% turnover each year.
Yeah.
So the savings here can be dramatic. And it's, again, another tool for CFOs and CEOs to have with them that they can use to go ahead and help to kind of generate additional profits. And the last one that I'll share is around the tax incentives. Now, the three things I first shared, the medical underpayments, the AP automation, and the earned wage access products, those are typically oriented towards organizations that have at least 250 employees or more, right? It serves up to the largest of companies. Whereas this tax product is actually focused on companies that are quite small to mid-size. So anywhere from about 10 to 250 employees. And what this is related to is the government programs that we're all familiar with that have been put into place over the last few years. There was the PPP program, right? And the ERC program that was trying to incentivize people to keep people employed while the country was locked down. Now, while those programs are seeing changes, they still have a number of things that are available inside of the ERC program. And the government has just made available an additional 2.3 trillion with a T dollars in incentives along these lines. And the challenge is most CPAs, accountants, finance people, and certainly small business owners don't know how to appropriately qualify for and get those kinds of incentives. So my partner in that regard has done something really brilliant. They've literally made a tax calculator that takes 60 seconds. A person goes in and enters in a few pieces of information about their number of employees, how many they hire each year, whether they own any commercial property. And with a couple of questions, they literally can see how much money they could collect from the IRS. And then if the client wants to go ahead and do that, this company goes off and collects that money for them.
So it
IRS.
matches them up with the available programs, is that?
Exactly. They've got a SaaS tool. They've been doing this now for 23 years. So their SaaS tool does exactly that. The moment you enter in a few data points, their tool starts to scrape through all of the government programs they've identified, national, local, even down to the community level. And then they'll tell the client what's available. If the client wants them to go get it, again, this firm will go out and collect it. And then when the IRS pays them directly, again, full contingency to go ahead and do that kind of process. And so those are the primary things that I focus on nowadays. I have multiple other service providers doing really interesting things. But what I wanted to share here goes back to the point we touched upon a little while ago, and that is this idea of you don't have to build your consulting firm by yourself, right? you have a certain core expertise and interest, right? So why not find ways to build a suite of partners and collaborators around what you're doing? You're going to find that you can better serve your clients. You'll be brought into more opportunities because as you build that kind of relationship and network, other people will do the same for you. So, for example, in the things that I've just shared, and I see you have a question, Jarek, I'll get in one moment.
Sure, go
In
ahead.
those things that I do, that is the framework that we have at Vault. So, for example, if any of those services that I've just described might be interesting to a relationship you have with a CFO or CEO, get in touch with me. Right? That's
Sure.
our core operating principle, right? Let's do this together. Let's go ahead and deliver your clients the best possible solutions they can. And together we can all win. And Derek, you have a question. What was it that we should touch on?
Well, I just interviewed someone and they said their main differentiator was that they're completely objective. They're not selling any tools, so they can focus on. I mean, they're not in the financial industry; they're in supply chain. But I'm thinking, that the disadvantage is, or potential disadvantage is being objective, you know. But then I'm wondering, on the other hand, with the solutions you're talking about, how many options are there out there? How many competitors out there in those certain niches for those technology providers? I mean, it sounds like you're talking about some unique tools. So,
Yes, and there are competitors for everything, right? If someone tells you they're the only game in town, I run the other way. So there certainly are competitors. What I think is quite unique, though, is I've found very few companies that will do things on full contingency.
mm-hmm.
And that's really a game changer because, again, in this economy, people are risk averse. It's completely natural and expected. And the other piece that I find quite unique is this idea of an audit, right? Not the bad audit where someone from the government's coming in and looking to find out where you messed up, but a positive audit, meaning learn up front what opportunity is available and then decide if you want to go after it. Right? In this day and age, I find very few companies that want to invest dollars without knowing what they're going into, simply because some vendor or consultant has sold them on the idea that they could benefit. Right. So this concept, you asked a really interesting question, like, is it better to be objective, right, or subjective, and I think in this round, meaning going in with a certain potential solution in mind. And my philosophy in life is both and, meaning I'm going to go in with a lens where I know I can help this CFO or CEO with a certain offering. But as we talk and as we learn more about their business, there are probably complementary services that can be offered. And I would look to find other people, other consultants, other solutions to do those complementary things. I never want to try to be all things to all people, but unless you have a very strong relationship, it's hard to go into a new client objectively and essentially say, hey, let me look around and tell you what I can find.
Well, it's better to offer a one-stop solution. That's what I do. I mean, that's what I recommend. You're going into one-stop solution, not just a bunch of advice and a binder that you put on their desk and say, okay, now you just got to figure it out. Just got to go through all the technology vendors and figure it out, and you don't really know, and then your risk goes up. And that brings me to my next question. Actually, something you said about that you can help them. Can you give me a real life example of a company that was struggling with one or all or a few of those problems that we just covered and what they did about it?
Sure. And I'll talk in kind of more generalities to protect the confidentiality, but think of a health system doing approximately $1 billion in revenue per year. This is the medical underpayment solution that I'm talking about. So the partner went in And what they did, they took in these contracts and their reimbursement files. They went back about 12 to 24 months so that they could do a full audit of this process. And they also look at that time frame because these contracts do have terms that end. So there is a point in time at which that money is gone forever if they don't address it. And so they ran that full audit, and they ended up not only identifying but collecting $100 million that went right back into the bottom line of the health provider. Again, the process to do that is a quite simple one. Again, they ran this audit. Then in the audit, they identified the patterns of behavior that the insurers were doing that seemed to be at conflict with the contractual positions. And then they went off and negotiated on behalf of the provider with the insurance companies. And what typically happens in these situations is that when an insurance company is given, call it several instances of small dollars that have errors, you kind of fly under the radar and they start to accept and pay these smaller amounts. And then at some point in time, they're going to realize that there's a large dollar value at risk there. And then they'll look to negotiate some kind of settlement to take care of that whole period. And that's exactly what happened in this scenario.
So this is the solution that you're suggesting that you offer.
Yeah, I don't operate that. My partners
operate.
Your partners.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we've got some proof then. It works.
This particular solution has been running for 15 years. They have a 100% success rate, meaning they have never run an audit and not found money that they could collect. And that's going to be true across the board inside of these various types of offerings. Because as good as a company might be in any discipline, as good as the finance department may be, there's always ways to improve.
That was actually my next question. What lesson can a hospital learn from this example? And I guess that's the answer, that they can always improve. There's always more money there. They just got to look harder.
There's always more money. And the way that we like to think of it is the outcome is binary for the hospital, meaning either we're going to find money, and the amount of money is TBD. Again, on average, it has been 22%. The smallest they've ever found and recovered is 10%. Or on the other scenario, we could find that there's $0 available, that everything is being collected perfectly. And that would be an amazing outcome for the hospital to know, right, with hard data, that their people, technology, and process is running exactly how they would expect it to be.
And there's zero upfront risk because you're on contingency, and then they'll know they're getting a return on investment.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's no risk there. And quite frankly, they'll never find the second outcome. Like, there is no scenario realistically in which there isn't more money available to them. So the takeaway, for people working in healthcare is that there are so many ways that hospitals are being hit these days, right? And many of the institutions, almost all that I've spoken with, got used to the, call it, gravy train over the last few years because they were giving tremendous incentives over these past few years, which are now being rolled back. So just the normal operating procedure for a hospital that people had gotten used to can no longer support the day-to-day operations in a profitable manner. So it's almost to say, unfortunately, that the system itself is structurally unprofitable now, even if people are operating with the best of intentions and the best of people and the best of technologies.
If a hospital, is there a certain job title of person that would this information would be most pertinent to? like what we're talking about here, hospital underpayment.
Yeah.
But that would be
So
the CFO.
it's certainly the CFO. Yeah, the
Okay.
CFO is the decision maker here. The CEO, of course, a decision maker as well, often more of an influencer, for this conversation. And then if you think about just below them, it would be the people that work in revenue cycle management. And this is something that would make their lives a lot easier. As you might imagine, though, some people might on first blush think that this competes with their job, right? So you could have an initial hesitation. In order to address that, we do something, again, that's more, I would say, unique to the industry. And that is, we will only start working on files where the revenue cycle team is no longer working on them. So they're going to collect no future money on those files. They've metaphorically put them in the wastebasket, and that money is gone forever. And again, remember, they usually don't even know that that money is available. So that's the way that we would address that question. We only come in after all of the providers' systems, processes, teams, whether internal or external, have done their work. And then we say, hey, give us these files where you're going to get nothing else. Let us do our thing, and we'll go ahead and bring you some more profit.
Okay. My next question was going to be, if a CFO hears this podcast and, it makes them a little bit interested, I was wondering, what steps could they take? What could they take a look at and say, this is worth looking into, or I don't think it's worth looking into? And it sounds like the thing to do is to look at those receivables that they've given up on, and look at those on a no contingency basis. That would be the best thing. There's no risk to them. Is there anything they could look at and say, it sounds like we should look into this, other than just hearing the podcast and saying, okay, is there anything they can look at? Or
yeah, so they already know of this problem for the aged receivables, right? So they already know how much money they are not collecting on things that they've identified. What they don't know is what's sitting inside of those aged receivables and those aged, call it contractual relationships, that they haven't yet identified.
Okay.
So that's where this auditing software that we have comes into play. It's kind of like you don't know what you don't know. And we can go and capture the aging receivables piece. That's the easy part. But what's more important is to let us come in there and identify the things they haven't seen yet that we can collect for them. And the process is quite simple. It's literally, and of course, you'll put my contact information here, but Jay Bernstein at vaultprofitpartners.com, and I'll give you my cell phone as well. And the process is simply to get in touch with me, and we set up a 30-minute discovery call with my partner company. And after that discovery call, things move very quickly. So inside of 3 to 4 weeks, we can have the full audit done. So inside of 3 to 4 weeks from that call, they can know exactly the dollars that we've identified. And then starting from there, we'll go out and collect it for them. So it's a kind of very simple process.
Okay. I think that's a lot of information for the CFOs out there that want to deal with this problem. On another note, I like to share some tips with my audience. I have a newsletter with 1,100 consultants, similar to you, with similar background to yours. And I provide them with growth tips on how they can grow their consultancy and grow their business. And I understand you worked as a business development manager in the past. And I'm wondering, do you have any advice for them, or maybe advice you'd give to yourself 5 years ago, or when you were new in business? Something that's worked.
Absolutely. It's a great question, Derek. And the biggest advice that I could give to my younger self is get comfortable with sales, because everything we do in life involves selling, right? We sell services, products, we sell our ideas, we sell ourselves, right? And I find a lot of my friends, my colleagues have a real challenge accepting that, right? So that would be number one, and that is do whatever you need to do, read whatever you need to do, study whatever you need to study to get comfortable with that idea that, yes, you're selling and there's no way around that. And once a person gets comfortable with that, I would say then they can start to put their own spin on what that means to them, right? As a consultant, right, you're really looking to solve problems, right? And inside of McKinsey, that's the catchphrase for all of the initial work. Let's have a problem solving session, right? What's the problem we're solving? And so I find that when I learn to put that lens on these conversations with potential clients, it became much more comfortable because that was really what we're doing and what I continue to do today. I'd like to find out what's bothering a potential client and then bring together the best suite of people and services to help them. So that would be, I would say, number one most important thing that I would have said to my younger self. Number two, it would be to go ahead and surround yourself with mentors and things, people that you can learn with. And those mentors could be people that you have personal relationships with. They could be teachers that you study with. It could be authors whose work you resonate with. And I'm a big proponent of that we should keep on a daily basis learning and learning and learning for a few reasons. Number one, it will help, to grow as a person, as a consultant, as a business builder. But number two, it keeps top of mind to you things that you could use to help those potential clients or to inject into a conversation or simply just to have an enjoyable conversation with someone, right? When you're building business, it's not just about getting down to business, right? And saying, I do X, for you. So will you go ahead and bring me on board? If you can learn to develop this suite of, say, conversational tools and conversational capability and draw in various pieces of insight, you might be able to, in an initial call or a few calls with a potential client or even a social event where you meet them, you can share some things that might pique their curiosity, right? And in those kind of offhand social conversations, that has led to a lot of business over the years. So I encourage people to continue to kind of, learn and do and explore and even put yourself into things that either you disagree with or you don't know anything about, and just kind of keep pushing in that regard. Another thing I would share with my younger self, getting down to more kind of tangible or tactical things, and that is get really good with the current tools that are being used by your target audience, right? I know, Derek, you're an expert in this regard, right? LinkedIn, you got to know how to do it, right? You got to know how to build out that profile, use Sales Navigator to identify those prospective clients, figure out the right way to reach out to them and start to build a relationship. But if you sit, say, back from LinkedIn and you think more broadly, right, you should start probably thinking about, how do I use video more frequently? A big shout out to my friend Todd Hartley. If you don't know him, please look him up. He is incredible at teaching people how to leverage video inside of email or text messaging and things like that. And it's really transformational because as you look not only at, call it, my generation, right? We love video. Every person, no matter their role, probably watches Netflix or Hulu or something like that. It's a medium that's able to convey so much information emotionally, visually, verbally. And to the extent that you can leverage that inside of your business activities, it will give you a tremendous boost. So that's one thing I would say, get up to speed on kind of where the market is today for those latest tools. Derek, I know you've been working in this space a tremendous amount. There's a lot more we could dive into. Where should we take this conversation?
Actually, there's one thing you said. I actually like to challenge you a little bit.
Sure.
I mean, I know you worked at McKinsey, and I read a book on McKinsey called The McKinsey Way. And one theme that constantly comes across in the book is McKinsey doesn't sell. McKinsey doesn't sell. They've been in business, though, for over 100 years. And I know they send interns into prospective customers to work for free. And they have this whole infrastructure built up. They have this name. They're the top consulting company in the world. They don't really have to sell. They have so much top of mind awareness. I looked at their website though and analyzed it. They push out a lot of content, and I think they're adapting to the online, the realities of marketing online too. They do really high quality content, and they constantly have articles coming out on their website. Other than selling, though, what do you have any tips for building that relationship? Because what I find is you're not just selling. I'm also a marketing consultant, and I provide marketing services, a wide range of marketing services. It's about you're not just selling services, though. You're selling a relationship. They want to know you, like you, and trust you. And nowadays, people are kind of getting to know people through the content. And if you don't have content out there, they're reading someone else's content. So it isn't. Often people are not ready to be sold right at front, right away. Do you know what I mean? You got to do something to get to the point where you can have that sales conversation and gather information about their problem, and then take them. I sort of break it down into 3 phases. You got to attract them, you got to build value for them, and then finally, like a conversion phase where they trust you enough, they're willing to give you information.
Yes. So the first to your comment about kind of McKinsey saying that they don't sell, that's not true. Again, that goes back to what we touched on a few minutes ago. That a lot of people don't want to admit
they
that
don't only
they are
sell.
selling, right?
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, you're marketing constantly.
You're constantly marketing, and again, this happens tremendously across, I would say, professional providers of services. Think doctors, lawyers, consultants. For some reason, people like to think that they're quote unquote above selling. I don't have to sell, right? They haven't yet embraced, and that's a big impediment to people's success. And that's why I tell people, number one thing I would have told my former self is everybody sells, right? And so when I say selling, I'm talking about this broad idea whereby you have a certain, say, ideas, products, services, things, right? And you need to first make people aware of them, which we'll touch upon in a moment. But you have to get really comfortable in telling people why those things are really good for them, on building the relationship of trust, to enable them to even consider, right, doing something with you. And I know in a little bit we'll touch upon the book that I'm about to publish, because that's what the book is about. But to your point, yes, marketing is vital as well, right? Content marketing, referral marketing, so many different tactics. And that's a world there that you have lived in, right, for a long time. I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts, because the marketing function, to my mind, is the one that has become the most complex over these last few years, right? You can no longer have someone, even for a small business, do all your marketing, right? It's become so large in terms of technology, tools, processes, platforms. I'm curious to kind of what you've experienced and how you're thinking about that these days.
Well, a lot of my background, maybe even half my background, is in sales. I used to sell IT consulting services to enterprise clients. And I actually started out in sales. My first sales job was selling $10,000 Lincoln welding machines door to door to manufacturing companies. And the company didn't have a website. And the owner, the company, we were sort of a distributor, and I was trained by Lincoln Electric. He said, he gave me a car. He said, just get in the car, just go knock on the doors. Here's the binder. Just get in there with the business card and get a meeting, And what inevitably ended up happening, though, is you're knocking on doors and they roll their eyes. Oh, a salesperson. And then you follow up and you come back and then you warm up talk to the people in the lobby and they get to know you and they're friendly. And then you leave some welding caps. And this was another salesperson who told me this trick. He says, look, leave them because they love to get the welding caps because they're the managers, give them out to their welders as rewards. So then I'm coming back and then I'm bringing them a coffee and you're building that relationship. And then finally they get to know you and they, all right, let's sit down and go through it. And then they look at it and then they go, yeah, but I already have a welding machine. I say, yeah, but, and I would explain to them, this is the most modern equipment out there available. You can train new people in a fraction of the time. They're using the latest equipment. There's very little cleanup and all these reasons. And then I would do an analysis and I'd say, okay, give me 1 foot of your welding. I take that back to our office. We'd analyze it. And then we'd produce a report on this. And then we would come back and I would explain it to them. I would have the leasing agreement with me and say, look, I can help you sell your old piece of equipment. You're going to make money on that. And within a few months, you're actually going to be making more money than you are now. And you're going to pay for the thing in no time at all. And it's still not it's still not a slam dunk because they got to learn the new equipment. Their people have to learn the equipment. So there's this relationship building stage before I could actually get the opportunity to actually sell. So it's marketing. Sales is all one thing. It's often called sales and marketing. It's really marketing and sales. And I see it, and from all my experience, it's really 80-20. It's 80% building the relationship before they know you and like you and trust you enough to let you into their world and actually give you information that they know that you can then use to sell them something. So they got to trust you first and believe in you, and then they'll give you the information. And then you're going to get a chance to give them a proposal, and then they've got something to work with. So the know you, like you, and trust you phase, they don't know you. Everybody's trying to sell them something. So if they have documented proof like case studies or testimonials, that's just one step. But then of all the potential customers out there, 80% of them are just not interested. And there could be 100 or 1,000 reasons why they're not interested. They've just bought a solution like that, or it's just not in their budget, or they're not going to do anything. Their priorities are somewhere else. You have to pre-qualify them for interest so you can focus on the ones that are actually interested and then build trust with them and then get the opportunity to meet with them. So people focus on sales because that's where the money is, but to get to those people. And a lot of businesses I found, and I worked for companies as a salesperson, when they're pushing me, come on, Derek, get out there, get some sales. And it's all marketing. It's all marketing work. You're calling, following up, and it's relationship building. And now on the internet, with the internet out there, it's very hard to get people on the phone they know, and they just aren't taking the calls. And there's a lot of content out there. And this is my new approach, how I help my clients, is I work with LinkedIn, connect with specific people, and then find out if they're interested, and then send those people. It's like a combination of account-based marketing, but it's the consistency, because they're not going to buy. Maybe only 1% of the potential market out there is actually ready to buy anything. So when you go to sell them something, they're not ready to buy. So if you don't have any reason to keep staying in touch with them, they're going to forget about you. So it's selling, like you say. You have to have a sales mentality. And like you say, a lot of people, they don't want to sell, and have a sort of a production mentality or a supply side mentality. We just got to create it, and then we just got to advertise it. And there's no selling. That doesn't work now. But you are right. Selling is important, and you're always selling, but you got to build the relation. That's just my point of view. But
and as an anecdote related to that, thank you for sharing that. When I was doing my MBA at Wharton, a good friend of mine created the sales club. Now, this was 2007, 2008. Imagine a school that's been around as long as Wharton has, hundreds of clubs, and they didn't have one focused on selling. They had one for almost everything else you could imagine, but it speaks to that point.
It's a skill. I mean, I've been through I was a business development manager for 2 Fortune 500 companies, and I've been put through the most advanced, expensive sales training programs. And it is a skill. And it's like after a while, you've been trained on it, you've done it, you kind of get it. You go, oh, that's so simple. I get it now. And then you know how to sell, and you realize you're actually going through these steps as you're selling. A lot of people who have lots of sales experience, they don't even know what it is they're doing. They're just naturally good at it. They just start building rapport and listening, and but you can get trained on it too. Yeah. So yeah. I'm surprised. That is surprising. Yeah.
And Derek, by the way, by your sharing your experience and the words you've chosen, you could not have teed up better a conversation about the book that I'm
Great.
about to release. So would
Tell me
love
about
to
it.
dive into that if it's
Go
good
ahead,
with
man.
you. So to your point about kind of people've got to know, like, and trust someone, right? It's all about building those relationships up. I personally believe that sales is done backwards nowadays. And what I mean by that is we tend to think that it takes time to develop trust and to build a connection. And what we now know from neuroscience is that these things, trust, connections, their feelings, their emotions, and we can actually measure them and the strength of them. And when we do that in the laboratories, and I'll share some places that are doing some amazing research, what they're finding is that when we do like, trust, connect with someone, our brains and bodies literally link up with one another. And that linkage can be measured either with some EEG brain technology, heart monitors, and a variety of other technologies. And that process is currently referred to as synchrony. So synchrony is the act of getting in unison with one person or a group of people so that we start to do things at the same time. And the book I'm writing is specifically focused on that. It's called The Age of Synchrony. And the reason why I call it that is because we are now reaching a point where we can measure and understand this synchrony in a manner that enables us to start to use it as a skill. Whereas until now, it's been considered a random process, right? Almost everyone watching us here, I'm sure, has met someone at some point in time and just thought, I'm going to do business with this person. I really like them. And you don't know why that is. The reality is we can't know why that is because that liking happens at a level in our brains and in our bodies that we can't express with words. And now that we can measure that connection, measure that synchrony, we can start to teach people how to use that to their benefit. And where I say I think that sales is completely backwards, what I mean really is you can create trust and connection before you even meet a person if you learn how to utilize your neurology and your brain and body to do so. And I've been doing it for the past 27 years. So I've now developed a system whereby I can teach people to create this unison, this synchrony on demand with whomever they want, whenever they want. And they can do it using only thought. That might sound crazy at first, but now we know out of the research coming out of Wharton. Wharton has a wonderful program that's called the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative. I'd encourage everyone here to check that out because the leader there, Michael Platt, and his team have been researching synchrony now for a long time. And what they're seeing is that it's not only measurable, but it's evident across so many different types of interaction. And being focused on business, they're focused on leadership and related areas in the use of technology and synchrony and the understanding of neuroscience. So I'm really excited to start to bring this out to the world. The book will launch in January of this coming year because I think we've reached a point in time whereby the ability to unleash these, what I would call inner biological technologies, right? This isn't something you or I have to learn, right? You do this just by virtue of being human. And it started when you were in your mother's womb. And so if we can now take these biological technologies that we all have understand them, and make them available for us to use, especially in the business world as we have this conversation, I think we have a dramatic way to make all of these things that we've been talking about today much easier, right? Because what we've now learned is that people make decisions based on emotion. So the decision is made based on how you feel, and then we use our thinking brain to justify that decision that we've already made, right? We tend to think, oh, I'm logical. I weighed all the pros and cons of this. But now the scientists, the research tells us very clearly, doesn't happen. Decisions are made at the emotional level, and then we justify them. So if you are looking to build a relationship with someone you haven't yet met, and I give you two choices, I want you to tell me which one you're going to choose. Number one is the traditional way. You meet someone, let's say you get in person, you look for things maybe on their wall or in their office that you can comment about. You're trying to find some common bond or relationship, right? Who do we know? Have we done business at the same places? Those kinds of things. And your hope is over time, you're going to build trust and connection so that in a business sense, the person will do business with you. That's the way we traditionally run things, right?
That's the way salespeople are trained. I know.
That's the way salespeople are trained, yeah.
I mainly get into a conversation with, I ask them questions and I think how they think. And right away I think, I don't think I can work with that person. Or you just know right away. Or and I think some people are just kind of, I hate to say it, narrow-minded. And some people are very open-minded and they want to get to the truth. I'm kind of focused on that person that really wants to get to, the truth. Maybe that's it. I got to read your book to find out. I'm actually going to read your book. I guarantee you I'm going to read your book.
I would love your feedback on it. And I think what's interesting about this process is by going through the process that you just mentioned, ultimately what we're trying to do is to have a person have a certain emotion or feeling, right? Trust, connection. Those are emotions. Those are us trying to describe what we're feeling inside. So that's option one, what we call the traditional path. Option two is, what if you could walk into that first meeting and the feeling of trust and connection is already shared between you and the person or people you're meeting with. And that's what synchrony enables you to do, what I call applied synchrony.
Okay, but the challenge, sorry to interrupt. Please. I find the challenge today is, how do you build trust digitally through the internet? Like, how do you project yourself without getting in front of them and meeting them and talking to them? Because I think the challenge of a lot of businesses today is they're just out there. They're outsiders. They're never going to get them on the phone. They're never going to talk to them. What about any ideas on that?
So as it relates to synchrony, I'm not solving for the people that don't know that they don't know you. So, yep, shameless self-plug. But when the book comes out, for people who do want to start to leverage these things, I think it will really transform how they build relationships with people they're just meeting for the first time. And they might be pleasantly surprised how it can really improve those current business relationships for the people that they're already working with.
Okay, well, we've done a marathon podcast here, so I hope people get to the end of it to hear about your book. But I think we should wrap things up. So if a listener wants to get in touch with you and learn more about your services, maybe you could tell me again what your website address is.
Sounds great. Yeah, it's www.vaultprofitpartners.com. Yeah, so VAULT.
Okay.
PROFITPARTNERS.com. VaultProfitPartners.com. You can reach me by email. It's the letter J Bernstein at vaultprofitpartners.com.
Sounds good. Okay, Joshua, thanks for coming on the show.
No, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I always enjoy our conversations and really appreciate it.